Welcome back, everybody, to the Avexta DataSense Introduction to PowerShell course. My name is Alex Louie. So far, we've gone over some fundamentals of PowerShell, and today, what we're going to cover are data structures. We're going to cover two data structures that I think will get you started on the right track. And then using these two data structures, you can most likely will apply the knowledge to other data structures available in PowerShell. The first data structure that I want to go over is the array, and then I'll go into hash tables, and then obviously I'll create a couple of examples. Now, arrays are different from hash tables because arrays are stored in, you can say, in a sequential manner with elements in your memory. Hash tables are not stored that way. Hash tables have keys. And if you didn't know, a hash table data structure actually uses what we call a hash function to look up the keys in memory. A hash table is actually always going to be faster in lookups because the hash function itself is optimized to do faster lookups based on that hash function. Now, this is something you don't need to be entirely worried about in understanding. I think at the highest level, you just need to know that there is a difference between the way elements are stored in an array versus elements being stored in a hash table. Let us take a look at an example of using an array. So what we have here is I've declared an array called A, and I have a couple of elements in my array. Now, if you notice, when you want to look at your array in terms of the methods and properties available, all you'd have to do is type in $A dot, and then scroll down and you can see all the properties available to you. You can even do a for each, where, item. Now, I'm not going to go into all of these properties. I'm just going to teach you how to iterate over an array, and I'll outline some special methods or properties that I'd like you to be aware of in doing these, creating an array as a data structure. Okay, so let's look at an example where I can just iterate through my array using a for loop. Taking a closer look at this example, as you've reviewed your for loop syntax and the logic in my previous video, we initialize a variable I to 0, and then we want to go from 0 up to the array size -1. Why -1? Well, arrays in PowerShell start at 0, which means that if we're trying to access this element, this would be the 0th element. This would be the first element, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth element. So you can think of it this way. You can think of this as a box of memory locations where the 0th index is going to map to whatever the value is here. So at the 0th index, I have the value 1. If I wanted to get the first index or the first element, then that would be my index of 1, and whatever's in my index of 1, it's my value 2. Now I should really change these so that you don't get confused, because these are values. Okay, these are values, and they could pretty much be any value that I want. And a lot of beginning programmers will have difficulty understanding the concepts in terms of mapping an element to a value. So when I declare my array and initialize it here, what I've done is I've initialized the actual values that are contained in my array. These are values that are contained in my array. What I don't see are the actual index elements that are mapped to each location. And we can say that at the 0th location, we have the value 9. At the first location, we have the value 20. At the second location, we have the value 89, and so on. You're going to notice that although I have 7 elements, the highest element I can actually access is going to be the 6th element. Why? Because we started at 0. If we had started at 1, then this would be a 7. But because we started at 0, the highest element I can reach is 6. Well, what does the dot length function return? This actually tells me the actual number of elements in my array. The number of elements available is 7. This is not going to tell you the highest index length or the highest index available. It's just going to tell you how many elements you have in your array. In this particular case, because it's going to return a 7, you want to subtract the 1 because that is the highest element that you can access. By subtracting 1, I get 6, and then this will go up to the value 6. The next part of my for loop, as we are aware of, is my counter, and I've decided to count by 1. And once this goes into the body of the for loop, it's going to write whatever is at the current element we're at. Initially, when I is 0, we run this comparison. Remember, this is a pre-test loop. So it's going to initialize the value, then do the pre-test check. If this is true, then execute the body. We're going to write the value of whatever is at index I. Remember, we start at 0, so whatever is at index I, which is index of 0, that's going to give us 9. Come back up to the loop, we increment, and then we do the pre-test again. But at this time now I becomes 1, and we should print the number 20, and so on. It's going to continue on and on and on. So the syntax for you to access or read an element in an array would be the array name, the identifier. So in this case it's $A, and then in brackets you would put in the element variable that you want. Now this element variable has to be an integer, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a variable. It could actually just be a value. So let me, before I even run this loop, I want to give you an example where I'm just printing out the value. So basically we can say is, if I wanted the element in, let's say, index 3, what this will print is 2. It's going to print 2. So let's do that. So here is the element 2. If I wanted to print the 6th element, then I would do that, and that would print out 20. Now, if we go back to our loop here, all we're doing is substituting what we initially did in terms of a literal value for the element access, and we're replacing that with a variable, which is I. And as we go through, it's going to iterate through each element in the array. So if I play this, you'll see that now it prints out everything in my array. One of the cool things about PowerShell is that you can actually pipe the array and sort it yourself. So let me just comment this code out. And if I wanted to sort the A array and do the following, you'll see that it's going to sort from least to greatest. Now the ascending is default, so if you want descending, I can just do a dash descending and then run this, and then you see that as well. So arrays in PowerShell are very powerful. They're very powerful. They not only can you sort it, you have other methods available to us. And let's take a closer look at those methods. Like I said, I'm not going to go over all of them, but I'm going to go over ones that perhaps you may find useful later on in your sysadmin career. So let me explain the for each function or method in the array. So what we're doing here is we originally started with this integer array, and I'm going to sort it by piping it and assign it to my new array called B. For the B array, I'm going to use the for each method, and inside that function, I'm going to get each element. So $_ means get the element, it's accessing the element currently. Assign it to a new variable called item, and then using the right host just to print it out on the console. So if I run this, you'll see that I have now my printed out values of my array. At the same time, if I wanted to, I can also do some math operations, because anything that goes in here is, you can use PowerShell commands. I could say addition of equals item, and then let's add 10 to each element. So addition of, if we do that, let's clear this. You see that I've added 10 to each element. So the original element was 9. Remember, I'm sorting this, so sorry, the original element was 2 because it's sorted, and then 2 plus 10 will give you 12. The next element, the smallest one, is 9. You add 10 to that and you get 19, and so on. Another way to do this is you can simply use the for each loop, as we've learned before in our previous lessons, and we can do a for each on each element in the array. So as we're going through, we're going to declare a point. We can call this an iterator variable. You can name this whatever you want. You can call it item. Okay, you can call it I, doesn't really matter. And you just follow the syntax. So it would say item in A, and each item would represent, and each iteration in the loop would represent one element in the array. Now, I'm not using the sorted version, so if I run this, it's just going to give me the values in my array. Now, if we want to start having some fun with this, you can actually use something like a commandlet that spits out any type of list. In this particular case, what we're doing is we're doing the ctemp directory that has, you know, a set amount of files. So if I do dir c:temp, right? So these are the files that I have. What I'm doing is I'm taking that output and storing it into my array called myArray. And within my code, now I can iterate through each element in my array. In this particular case, all it's going to do is it's going to print out the file names. It's going to print out the file names as we iterate through. Now you may have noticed that there are other properties available on the CDIR, right? And the beauty of this is it's going to automatically implicitly cast our object. And when I do the right host, it's actually defaulting to printing out the name property, which is great. Now, what if I didn't want to print out only the name property? What if I wanted to print out the last write time? Very easy, because it's an object. Remember, everything's an object in PowerShell. I can access the property by doing last write time and do that. And I can even, in the same, because I'm in the same iteration, I'll write out the name, and then I can also write out the length of the file. So that automatically becomes a object. So if I clear this and see that, I have the last write time, the name of the file, and the size of the file. So if you're wondering if you can access different properties, you can, as long as a commandlet that you are accessing, more than likely it's going to have some properties available, and then you can loop through it using the for each statement. The last thing I want to show you in manipulating arrays and trying to filter arrays is you can actually filter using the where clause. And what this does is it'll give you a subset of what is containing in your array. So for example, as we saw before, you have dir ctemp. It's going to give me all the files in my temp directory. I'm going to store that in my array. Now remember, arrays have methods available to them, and one of them is the .where. If I do a .where, syntactically what I need to do is I can open up a filter using the open brace, curly brace, close curly brace, and then the $_ means the current item that I'm currently at. So it's obviously gonna do a loop, but you're not gonna see much of that. And for that specific item, you're gonna cast it to a string. You should actually put the type that you're gonna compare to. In this particular case, each file is an object, and that object has a property called name, right? As we saw, it has a length, has a last write time, and a name. We're going to only fetch the files that have the property name equal to testing.csv. And by doing that, I'm going to store that in my new array. And this new array will now contain the filtered list of only the files that are equal to testing.csv. So if I run that, see, that gives me the elements that I have testing.csv, which is something that is very, very advanced for PowerShell versus doing grep in Unix. Okay, I hope that I've enlightened you a bit more on arrays. On the next video, what we'll do is we'll cover hash tables, and then we'll move on to our little custom personal project. See you then.